Good morning. My name is Kathy Young, and I have the great privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the New York State Center of Excellence for Food and Agriculture at Cornell Agritech. The Center of Excellence is a dynamic hub for innovation and collaboration. We leverage the unparalleled research and expertise of Cornell University to accelerate economic growth and position New York State as a global leader in food and agricultural advancement. GrowNYC is a shining example of New York's commitment to the cultural and economic importance of upstate New York's food and agriculture systems. It is an ideal opportunity for Cornell University to showcase its mission of bringing new thinking and new solutions to some of today's biggest challenges. The symposium provides a forum for the Center of Excellence, our partners at Cornell's Center for Regional Economic Advancement and the GrowNYC program to collaborate on finding answers to urgent questions in the food and ag space. It also is an opportunity for our regional food and ag community to join us in the conversation. We are so glad to have you with us. And I encourage you to participate through the question and answer period and do the networking that's going to be available on the agenda. Enjoy the symposium.
Thank you, Kathy, and welcome to everybody in attendance this morning. We have an exciting panel discussion for you this morning on the topic of drafting a roadmap for emerging crops. The purpose of this session is to stimulate creative thinking on how to build successful businesses that provide highly valued food products to consumers based on emerging crops grown on New York farms. Our three accomplished panelists will share their individual narratives of how they got into their current business, what they've learned along the way, and how they envision the future of their business. I have the privilege of moderating this panel. My name is Gary Bergstrom. I'm a professor of plant pathology at Cornell University, where I've led programs of research and extension on field crop diseases for the past 39 years. This has allowed me to work closely with farmers, agribusiness, and processors in a number of supply chains. In recent years, I've had the privilege of co-leading a project on developing malting barley as a new crop in New York for the rapidly developing craft brewing and distilling sectors in the state. You will find two links in the chat room that may interest you along those lines. The first will bring you to a Name the Grain contest that would allow you to propose a name for Cornell's new malting barley variety. The second link will bring you to the program and registration site for the Empire State Barley and Malt Summit. Attendance is free, by the way, and this will be on December 16th. And at that conference, the winning barley name will be announced by Commissioner of Ag and Markets, Richard Ball. So our three accomplished panelists in the order of presentation today are June Russell, the Manager of Farm Inspections and Strategic Development for GrowNYC City, Silas Conroy, Director of the Supply Chain for Headwater Food Hub, and Stephen McKay, President of Micosta Enterprises. Each will flesh out a little bit of their own biographies in telling their own tale here. I encourage you to pose questions for these panelists, and the questions will be answered at the conclusion of all three panelists' presentations when we open up the discussion. So please share your questions or comments in the chat box that you will see to the right of your screen. We will take a look at them and address some of them during the final discussion. So with that, we'd like to move over to our first panelist, June Russell.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Gary. I always say when I hear you speak at workshops and field days that it's a miracle that we ever get crops out of the field with everything the plants have to contend with that's trying to otherwise eat them or consume them. So thank you for what you do. You brought us a long way. I work for an organization called GrowNYC. We're based in New York City. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our organization has three main programs. There's a conservation, which is zero waste program, and we run composting and textile recycling education. We have green space, which does community gardens and some green infrastructure developments, environmental education, and then food access and agriculture, which has green market, farm stands, fresh food box, and have been playing a major role in emergency food box programs that have been happening since COVID. Green Market falls within this program of food access and agriculture. We operate 51 markets in New York City. I think of us as a small army that spreads out in the city here on the ground. Most of this work is done outside on the pavements. We create pop-up markets every single day of the week to reach New York City consumers. Our mission of Green Market is to support regional farms and bring fresh food to New Yorkers. So there's a two-pillar mission there, one that supports farming and agriculture, and the other is the consumer end and bringing that food to New York City. So just to step back a second, and Gary had asked for a little biographical background. Prior to coming to Green Market, which I did in 2004, it's been about 16 years now. I had a cooking career for about 15 years where I pretty much became an all-rounder, spent time in kitchens, some bakeries, was a beverage manager, bartender, ran a little cafe here in the East Village of New York. And it wasn't always, my life's goal necessarily. I had a real affinity, I found, to working with produce in particular. It was very compelling to me, and I found that I was actually more interested in the ingredients than I was the final dish, and more interested in how food was produced. I've always had very much an environmental concern. I grew up on Lake Michigan in the 70s and remember the pollution that was happening at the time, and looking at our natural systems, and was very distressed about that, and have been really motivated by a desire to contribute to a more sustainable food system that would provide nutrition and be less destructive to natural environments. So in 2004, I worked my way out of food production and into the market system, and basically was in the right place at the right time to take on the role as a manager of farm inspections. With that, I got our rules committee and looking at internal policy and doing an assessment of policy. And the first topic that came up at that time I was asked to address was our bakers' participation in the markets. And the big one there, with looking at how bakers are supporting the mission of the program, of course, is flour, and is there such a thing as regional flour? Our Green Market region extends across 6 states, about halfway into Pennsylvania, all of New Jersey, New York up to the Finger Lakes, Vermont, even parts of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut. So with my role doing farm inspections, it took me out into the region pretty far and wide, and I started to identify potential collaborators or anybody who was doing anything, any mills that were still in existence, any farmers that were still or had recently started growing small grains, and had the good fortune to connect with Ellie Ragosa, who had a SARE grant happening at that time. I was working with NOFA New York, and in some ways the rest is a 10-year history. When we connected, there was kind of an automatic, we need each other. We have a marketplace. We have bakers who are trying to encourage to use local flour. And here there were organic researchers looking to put small grains back into rotation into organic farming systems, because their low value a lot of farmers had stopped using them and were really reducing their rotations. So when we teamed up with those researchers, it's about 10 years to the day, basically, where we did our first grant-based programming. And that was Grains Week back in 2010. And the goal was really to bring small grains back into the conversation and prompt consumers, including chefs and bakers here in New York City, to start thinking about how they could integrate those ingredients into their menus, into their daily meals, basically. We've worked in that time on multiple grant projects and various aspects of trying to develop that value chain. Our biggest part of that, of course, is being that connector between the markets and the farmers and facilities, and being aware of where there's opportunities to push on certain ingredients. Sometimes we've seen the market out ahead of where supply is. Sometimes we've seen it the other way around, where we'll have a surplus of certain grains because the market isn't quite ready or isn't taking them up at the same speed. Next slide, please. So this is one of my favorite visuals here. On the right side is a map of our market locations in New York City. We are in all 5 boroughs, and also over the past 10 years, GrowNYC has done a lot of innovation in terms of marketing. We have youth market programs, food stands, food boxes, and these are things that are operating a little bit outside of the direct marketing model, which our classic green market is, which most of us know us through that model. And the image on the left is our Northeast Grain Shed, which really started to emerge as its own entity maybe about 7 years ago, where we could see some facilities that were popping up. Farmer Brown Flour is one, Don Lewis at Wild Hive, Main Grains, Small Valley Milling, for example. This is some infrastructure that didn't exist more than 10 years ago. Next slide, please. In 2009, GrowNYC created a policy that required bakers in the program to use a minimum of 15% local regional flour. And that actually had worked to kickstart the marketplace. We realized that grains is a volume game, and it takes a lot of participants. But we're very proud of our own GrowNYC bakeries and the impact that they have. It's about 300 acres a year that they support, and basically have provided a proof of concept so that we can grow these grains in this region, and they are usable. And in fact, some of our bakers are known for having some of the best bread in New York City. Next slide, please. This is just a quick slide on the field trials that are ongoing. We were just awarded 2 REI grants. One is anchored by Cornell to work on wheat varieties, rye, oats, and along with that, we've done performance evaluations for baking and sensory for tastes. Next slide, please. In 2014, we launched the Grain Stand, and as a means to get products out to market to as many consumers as we are able to. We attend 12 markets that carry products from 14 different enterprises, which are farms, mills, a beanery. We have over 250 SKUs 6 years later, and 20 varieties of wheat have passed through the markets. Next slide, please. This is an example of some of those varieties that have come through the grain stands. Next slide, please. And I'm going to stop there because I think I'm about out of my time.
Thanks very much, June. We'll move on to Silas Conroy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my house here in Ithaca, New York. Yeah, really grateful to be here. So thanks to GrowNYC and Gary and all the other panelists here. Yeah, entrepreneurship and agriculture are sort of my two big passions in life. So it's really exciting to be here with you all to talk about both of those things. I'm going to tell a little bit of my story, but I think the sort of the message that I hope you get from my story as far as emerging crops is just the importance of understanding sort of all the different supply chain stakeholders when you're bringing whether it's a new crop or a new variety to market. So my story, I'm going to go way back. So in my early 20s, while most of my college classmates were getting their first engineering jobs, I decided to take a year-long trip to India and Nepal. And sort of, like as stereotypical as it gets, the white guy trying to go to Asia to, find himself and find purpose. And had a great trip. It was fascinating. Met lots of great people, ate tons of great food, but ultimately came back and was broke and unenlightened, as I like to say, and had to get a job. And the first job that I got was something I had vowed never to do again. After my high school dishwashing job, I got a job working in a restaurant that just happened to be sort of local food systems oriented. They were buying some local food from a couple local farms in State College, Pennsylvania. And I really found, as I think many folks here will attest to, getting into the business and the industry of food, whether food service or agriculture or somewhere in between, there is just a great community of people that are drawn to that kind of work, and I too was drawn to it, and I really found that it was something tangible that I could work on. So I had this idea at this time, as I started to work with more farmers and get more excited about sort of the whole food system, that I would create this like apprenticeship of working at many different sort of supply chain stakeholders throughout food supply chain. So I actually did that. Worked in restaurants in Pittsburgh and central Pennsylvania for about 4 years, drove truck for a cooperative of farms in Pittsburgh for a year, ultimately moved to the Ithaca area and worked at and managed Stick and Stone Farm, the organic, about 70 acres of organic vegetables at that time. And sort of got to see all these sort of different stakeholders' perspectives and viewpoints and what mattered to them in the food system. And that kind of has guided the rest of my career. So at the time I was working at Stick and Stone, which was the like 2010-ish, I had the opportunity to start my own food business. Stick and Stone had a small processing kitchen there, and took the opportunity nights and weekends to just sort of start my own entrepreneurial activity and explore that. And so that kind of became my laboratory and my sort of entree into sort of looking at sort of my work in supply chain work in local food systems and regional food systems. So there are a couple things that came to mind when I was thinking about this, looking back on it and sort of my pathway. That I think are important for emerging crops. One of them is a sort of clear one is one of my first sort of product line designs completely neglected almost all the stakeholders except for farmers, which for me, I'm just kind of an expression of my love for farmers and wanting to do right by them. But I designed a line of fermented foods that including kimchi and sauerkraut and fermented green bean and a couple other stranger ones, that if a farmer a vegetable farmer were to grow, all of those crops, it would make a really nice rotation on their farm. And so the key point that I was missing was, would the customers actually buy those in the right proportions to create this perfect rotation on the farm? So anyway, I bring this example up because I think it's sort of an obvious one, and looking back, it's like kind of a whole kind of dough moment. But I think a lot of us in agriculture can make this mistake of not starting with the customer requirements first, and just thinking about sort of all of the requirements on the farm side, which there are a ton, and there's a ton of complexity and a ton of just challenge there to overcome. But thinking about the customer, sort of thinking about the customer and working backwards is something that I sort of learned the hard way. Crooked Carrot, so I was making this line of ferments and many other value-added products, all with local ingredients. And that, like I said, that sort of is a laboratory. And one of the really neat things was because I was direct marketing, I was selling in the Ithaca Farmers Market and the Syracuse Regional Market, I was able to sort of iterate pretty quickly. So I don't know if Olga is on the call here from the Food Venture Center, but she might remember how many times I called the Food Venture Center and how frequently in those early days, trying to get new products approved, the recipes approved, so that I could put them into production. And that was largely driven by farmers calling me with excesses. So I somehow became the guy in the Ithaca area you called if you had too much, cabbage, or you had too many carrots, or you had too many tomatoes, or whatever, and tried to quickly design products and test them in the market to see what would stick. And through those early days, as not surprising to many of you professionals here, like I quickly found, I needed to sort of get pretty specific, and word specific, I say intentionally, around sort of the specifications of the crops that I was using in processing. And so that's sort of when I started kind of really coordinating and planning new crops with growers. So my classic example is, trying to do the classic fermented. Oops. Sorry. I'm not sure what that is. Here we go. Sorry about that, folks. So my first experiment with that was with cucumbers. So to do naturally fermented cucumbers or pickles, the variety and the maturity are very, very specific. And so I had for years just tried to buy the extra cucumbers that were around and never got really good results. But then through planning, was able to work with growers to grow. I remember the one was Calypso, was the very particular cucumber at that time. And Little Leaf was the other one that had the right level of maturity and worked well for the growers, and produced a really, really good product. I also began at that time to think about new varieties for my business as both in terms of like shared risk with growers and also as sort of a competitive advantage. So one thing that was really interesting was like, I looked at this in a couple different ways. Like when the red Napa cabbage came out, I realized that I could create, one of the first sort of like purple cabbage kimchis that had that more authentic kimchi flavor. Sometimes crop planning was more about processing qualities like the cucumbers, and other times it was more about working with growers. Just they were trying to improve the product had worked fine for me, but had not worked as well for the grower, and they were looking for sort of improved, kind of more the agronomic quality. What was their yield? What was what was their labor, those kinds of things. So in all those processes, every year I would get together with growers and crop plan, and they would usually have a couple new ideas that they want to try on their side, and I would have a couple new ideas on my side. 2015, after running the Crooked Carrot, sort of my grand experiment for 5 years, I realized I need to have more impact that I wanted to have. I needed a couple things. One was sort of more technical skills. And the second was I needed a bit of a bigger team and a bigger resource base in order to have the impact that I wanted. So 2017, I was lucky to be part of one of the first cohorts of the MIT MicroMasters program in supply chain, which is basically a rigorous program in forecasting, network optimization, supply chain strategy that was completely online, which was a great benefit to me and sort of provided those more of the technical skills I needed. And then the second piece, the larger team and resource base, I actually merged my business, the Crooked Carrot, with Headwater Food Hub in 2018. So joined a great team of like-minded people that were doing all kinds of things in food systems in our region, and became the partner and director of supply chain there. So Headwater, some of you may be familiar, but we are a food hub, which is different than just a distributor. The main difference, I would say, really does come down to the amount of planning we do with customers and trying to understand our customers' requirements and their changing needs, and then kind of taking those aggregated requirements and going back to all of our farmers and planning around what we can buy from them and what we're asking them to grow, and what are the specifications of what we want them to grow. We work with over 100 producers across sort of all the categories. If you can grow it in New York State, we buy and sell it. So that includes dairy, value-added products, protein, beef, chicken, pork, lamb, duck, and rabbit. And then, of course, produce is one of our big focuses, and that's a big focus for me.
Silas, we may have to move on, but I think we'll have a chance during the discussion to hear a little more about your current operation there. So thank you very much. And I think we'll, to try to stay on schedule, we'll move on to Stephen McKay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to share some of my experiences with you. I actually grew up in California and went to school at UC Davis, majored in bee biology and international agriculture, and had my master's in pomology and vocational teaching credential. All is while I've been working on teaching and working as an educator with Co-op Extension. I believe that my own practical experiences that I could be sharing, that I could have in my own, how should I say, my free time, would be very valuable to my teaching, whether it be in the VOAG arena or in Co-op Extension. So one of the things that I did when I got to New York and took my job with Cornell Cooperative Extension was to start a company called Micosta Enterprises. And in that company, what I wanted to do was to explore different crops that would be appropriate, because when I came on the job, I could see that there were still some problems with selecting the proper varieties for the climate that we had and for the pest problems that we had. And so I developed a trial garden and was able to select some of those, some new varieties that were coming onto the market that I found to be very, very good. Also, like I said, I had an interest in crops that hadn't been very well developed. And so began taking a look at some of those crops, and I want to share those experiences. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about both the growing end of things and also the processing end of things. What I found also with our local growers is that sometimes they would come to me with excesses of product. And I think kind of similar to what Silas was sharing, developing products that could be made, processed products that could be made out of those crops was another goal that I had. When I started to develop a small-scale kitchen, I had the local economic development people take a look at what I was doing. And of course, they had a little bit of help. They had a person who came in and said that everything that I was doing was not economically feasible. So my big challenge was to say, okay, I believe that I can overcome that problem and I can find a way, a solution to that. And I'm going to skip over a lot of things that I've done, but I want to get to the heart of one of the things that I think is the most important and that could be very valuable to growers in New York. I wanted to come up with a system for small-scale processing for small-scale growers that could be affordable and worthwhile using. At the time, I was working a little bit with Greg Quinn and Black Currants, and so he was wanting me to develop products that could be made out of black currants that he was growing. So also I had a local grower whose son had planted a bunch of black currants that were very bitter, didn't have good flavor, but still had like about 20 acres of these currants. So the big question was, what can we do with these things that taste so bitter and so bad? So I started playing in my kitchen and developed an infusion process, which actually can be developed for about $10,000 on a farm by a farmer or a group of small farmers. Just have to have a certified kitchen, which has clean surfaces, and a steam kettle, and a few tables, and you can use a heat process in order to be able to come up with the products. And so this infusion also has the advantage is that you can develop products that have short ingredient lists. And so I have a line of syrups, for instance, that only has 2 ingredients, sometimes 3, but just it's the main fruit that I'm trying to infuse, grape juice concentrate, and possibly some citric acid or ascorbic acid in order to acidify. The good thing is that out of this infusion process, there's no waste, because you end up with a syrup which could be used as a juice base. It can be used as a flavoring in ice creams. It can be used to make wine, coulis, vinegar, a wide variety of toppings. And then also the dried product, which normally somebody would either throw away one or the other of these things, but the dried product or semi-dried product can be used for baked goods and ice cream, out-of-hand eating, such as in trail mix, or possibly chocolate-coated with a panning process. So these products, like I say, they can be very healthy depending on what the ingredients are. And so you use high antioxidant berries, and then you come out with something that's really good. In a lot of cases, you have berries that are not saleable on the fresh market because they become damaged or slightly soft, and these are perfectly fine to put into this process. And so I worked with Aronia growers actually in the Midwest who had me come in and give a talk on this. And I know now COVID came, but they've asked me to come and to show them and help them set up one of these $10,000 processing facilities. So I want to swing back then into some of the considerations of the new crops that, or they're not new, I should say that they're undeveloped crops that possibly have potential. Some of the things that you have to consider when you're taking a look at these crops are the environmental considerations and varietal considerations. In environment, of course, you have to look at the soil types, possible pest problems, whether it be disease, insects, or mammals, and cold and heat tolerance. When you look at the varietal considerations, you're going to be taking a look at flavor, size of the fruit, yield, plant structure. Is it a good plant to hold up the fruit that it's going to bear? The ease of picking, does it have thorns? Marketability, how familiar are your clients with this? Is it going to take a lot of money in order to develop it? And that, of course, is one of the problems that they've run into with Aronia. We've got wonderful dried Aronia and Aronia syrups and beverages that are made with it and wine, but people are just not familiar with it. And so you have to come up with a good marketing strategy in order to be able to sell it. Now, with my small scale processing facility, it's possible to sell in the green markets and locally to the stores, so you don't have to worry about the the consumer familiarity as far as getting into a larger size production. A couple of other considerations on the varieties are post-harvest possibilities and the processing potential. So what I wanted to do now was to just take a little bit of time to look at each of a few crops that have potential or that I've tried that might not have potential. When I was in co-op extension, people came to me excited saying that, oh, alpine strawberries are the way to go. It's going to be the new future, the big moneymaker. But don't tell anybody because I want to be the one who develops it and it's going to be my secret and I'm going to make all the money from it. Well, of course, it turns out that alpine strawberries have a very limited bearing season and they're very, very, very small. And so in order to get your $27 per pound, how many hours of labor does it take in order to pick them? So one of the suggestions that I made to those growers was that you ought to start growing them as nursery stock. So you can sell them as plants to people so they can grow them at home and pick their own. Other things, ribes, gooseberries have a few problems with disease, but have a potential. There are some that have really good flavor. Black currants can be machine harvested, so they have potential and they have high yields, so they have a potential for growing on a commercial scale, the same way with red currants and Aronia. You look at something like American persimmons, they have wonderful flavor and potential for selling like locally, but they have a problem with astringency. If you don't pick them soft, sometimes the consumers don't ripen them properly, so they get a bad impression. Pawpaws is another tree fruit crop that has potential. It is high yielding and can be ripened off the tree, and so it's shippable and can be marketed that way. Honeyberries is another one that's kind of like the alpine strawberries. They're so small. I guess in Eastern Europe and in Russia, they machine harvest them. But as far as growing them here on like for a small scale farmer, you might have it as a U-pick type of a thing, but it's a thing that takes a lot of labor also. I still think that there is a lot more that can be done with the development of caneberries, be it red raspberries, blackberries, and raspberries, all three types, red, purple, and black. Also, strawberries. I just picked these strawberries this morning, seascape variety that were protected with water and floating row cover. So you can get strawberry production into the middle of November with the proper protection.
Hey, Stephen, I hate to interrupt you, but we're going to have to transition into the general discussion. So
Sure. No problem.
Maybe hold on to a few of your additional points and we can cover that in the discussion. So thank you very much, all three panelists. That was terrific. So we're now looking forward to covering some of the questions that came up during your presentations. And let's start out with a question from for June. Does GrowNYC interact with CEA growers, containerized indoor ag, such as Bowery Farms?
We do have a couple of producers that are working indoors. I myself am not familiar with that term. And there's a few of those that have come into the program just this past year. But eligibility is based on the structure of the business. So we're a producer-only marketplace, and there are some restrictions on that business structure. It's meant to be an owner-operated market for small to mid-sized farms, although being rigorously discussed this year. But yeah, we've seen a couple of those models in New York, but we haven't worked with Bowery Farms, no.
Okay, the acronym was Controlled Environment Agriculture, by the way. So, June, another one for you. Based on the Green Market Grains experience, what are some of the strategies you could recommend for increasing consumer acceptance of new products in general?
Well, the marketing program, I think, has multiple strategies. I mean, I was just grinning, thinking like, tastes. We try to do tastings in our markets. There are cooking demonstrations on a weekly basis. We've hosted tasting events, home bakers meetups. It really is, we do lots of marketing and promotion, try to be playful with that in ways, and also very educational. But it really makes a difference when somebody has that visceral experience of tasting something. And we've found flavor components in small grains that we didn't know were available to us. So people have responded to that. And that, I think ultimately that can be one of the game changers is, when people taste something good, and they usually want to find it again, and hopefully they're motivated to go find it and have it again.
Thanks, June. Question for Silas. What are some of the value-added products that you successfully introduced to the market while with Crooked Carrot?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the products that ultimately were most successful were the naturally fermented products. I think had the best economics as far as being viable for a relatively small business. And having a reliable supply chain for. I think particularly one that I'm proud of, I think, in this conversation is the Moo kimchi, which is a daikon kimchi. So daikon, Korean daikon, it's called Moo, grows really, really well in our climate. And I've often said that if there were a huge market for Korean daikon, that our small organic vegetable farmers in New York would be doing amazing. But we create a recipe specifically that used the daikon as the primary ingredient. And so we were able to, use a crop that growers wanted to sell. I'll say it that way. And that has been pretty popular.
So Silas, also for you, does the Headwater Food Hub provide any local food for larger institutions like universities? And if so, does this come with a different set of challenges? That is, like need for prepackaged processed produce?
Yes. Yes, we absolutely do. We sell into almost every wholesale customer segment you can think of, from retailers to institutions. We've done a lot of work in farm to school in the last few years, all the way up to direct to consumer. We have a direct to consumer model in the Finger Lakes. Institutions have been a big part of our work and connecting growers to them. And, kind of one of the things that I was sort of trying to get to is, each of these customers does have a different set of requirements. So as a person here mentions, prepackaged and processed, especially for schools, for farm to school, has been a big challenge that we've been slowly, working with Cornell Economic Development, Cheryl Thayer, for example, and many of our producers. We've been slowly kind of adding more minimally processed products to our offering specifically for that. Yep. So that's an example of finding out what a customer requirement is, what their specifications are, and being able to take that back to processors and producers and make that whole flow from the grower all the way up to customer work.
Thank you, Silas. For Stephen, what kind of consumer demand or marketing analysis is your company engaged in for these more obscure berry varieties?
We haven't been. So all I've done is to, market it at the local farmers market at this point. I also run another consulting business where I do H-2A and H-2B visas for temporary workers, which has been taking up a lot of my time lately. So I haven't really gone beyond local at this point. I mean, I sold some in the city. I've had markets over the past years, but I also went to the New York restaurant show one time, and I thought that these products would sell themselves because they had such great qualities to them, being short ingredient list, local, healthy, high antioxidant, et cetera. But it didn't really turn into much, so there's a whole lot more marketing effort that needs to be put into it unless you're going to just do it locally. And then they sell themselves locally because, like June was saying, you get your samples out to people. They love it. They say, oh, where can I get this? And I say, well, I'm sorry, I don't have a distributor, but I guess I could send it to you via post.
So here's a kind of a general question from a good entrepreneur here that wants to know, what crop should we be most excited about, invest in, and why? So I'll give you each a shot at that. Maybe, maybe Steve, maybe you want to take a first shot at it.
Okay, well, people are familiar with elderberries. And when I was working with Cornell Cooperative Extension, I had the opportunity to bring in 2 really top varieties. I actually brought in about 8 varieties, but 2 that really stuck out. And of course, with elderberries, you have a couple of uses. One, you can use the flowers to make elderflower beverage, and you can also use the elderberries. And they have high enough yield. The main problem that they have locally that I had was with a borer that got into the canes. I think Aronia also, because of its high production, but it just needs a whole lot more marketing to be successful.
June or Silas want to take a crack at that one? Opportunities for investment and why?
Go ahead, June.
Sure. I think, been very impressed with rye and the uptake of rye in New York State in particular, and that but it's really taken off with the distilleries and the development of Empire Rye. And also we've seen it come into the food culture as well by mostly like looking at some of the Nordic foods and the styles of breads that they make. And that one was a surprise, boy, when we had a baker who was making this Finnish rye bread. And all the things that people told us, weren't going to work around trying to develop small grains just went out the window. Like this guy comes in with this weird bread. It's really flat and it sells out, has a strong flavor. And I think there's potential to build on that. We've done very little variety of development around rye, but that's Cornell's working on that now. And I think just with the combination of the soil health potential connected with the food culture is a big one. It's a big opportunity.
Thank you.
Yep.
Silas, did you want to weigh in on that one on investment opportunities?
I think in at least in the produce world, as far as new varieties, I think the biggest success for us and for a lot of the growers we work with recently is the row 7 varieties, which is kind of for those not familiar, unlikely that people are not, but Dan Barber's project to bring out these very curated varieties in produce, and I think that it's one of the good examples to me of where, at least with the growers that we work with, those varieties are distinctive and are sort of differentiatable products for the growers themselves, but actually are differentiatable like all the way through the supply chain. So particularly row 7 name holds a lot of weight in the food service restaurant world, high-end restaurant world, but even to the point of seeing, row 7 seeds varieties on menus, I think has brought some, brings extra attention for restaurants and has brought higher prices for growers. So I'm interested, to answer the question, I think in the produce world anyway, really distinctive flavors seems like, varieties that you can brand and bring out really distinctive flavors seems like a very general way to go as far as investment.
I like to ask the question of the three of you. You each work very closely with farmers as well as consumers. And, we've been experiencing season after season of some pretty unusual weather patterns as the climate changes in whatever way. I mean, we didn't used to have to worry about summer-long droughts in New York State, for instance, but how does any of these changes affect your thinking about, your flexibility and ability to meet the future demand for some of these product lines you're looking at?
I can chime in. It's very good for grape growers, the climate change. However, last year, not this year, but the previous year, we got frozen out here. So, I mean, there's ups and downs and, unpredictability. But generally speaking, seedless grape varieties are so wonderful. And there's so many that have been developed by Cornell and available for growing. And growers who I worked with made lots of money with those varieties. As far as the other crops, I haven't really seen much of an impact yet at this point. All the crops that I work with are doing very well. Longer seasons, maybe, if you can get past that first October frost by a little bit of some kind of protection, you can, like I've done with these strawberries, go into November.
Thanks. There are a couple more questions come in from the audience. One for June, specifically about how do you manage small acreage grain harvest because it requires expensive machines for such a harvest?
There's a few folks who are, integrating grains that are on a small scale level. And usually that's like, what I've seen so far is there's a long learning curve. And being able to have the right size equipment is certainly important. And, being able to, the main thing with grains, if you're doing it on a small scale, is being able to bring it into market at food grade quality. I would say if you can manage getting it harvested and stored right, making sure that they're doing the testing and you're getting it cleaned down. That seems like a very key piece if they plan on doing some direct marketing with those grains, which would be the most appropriate place, unless you make contact with somebody like a Don Lewis who can work with different scales of growers.
We have a question from the audience. Someone's very interested in promoting sorghum syrup as a new crop / product, and because they think it provides a valuable opportunity for growers in the state. They're asking a question of how that would impact a business strategy.
We have a producer at the market who does sorghum syrup. And it's unusual to see in New York. He's the only one I know of. I haven't seen sorghum there's two different kinds. There's a grain sorghum, there's a syrup sorghum, but both are a very tall plant. You have to have the right size equipment again. And he's built a little niche market for his syrup, but it's something that I generally see down in Pennsylvania or a little bit more to the south, assuming that those are varieties that are adapted and do better in those regions. But it's possible.
Well, thanks, June. And I can't believe how we've come to the end of our time slot here. There have been so many fascinating points. I know I've personally learned a lot. And I have several more questions myself. I can imagine the audience does too. So I think I can speak for all the panelists. If you have some questions that you'd like in the future, I'm sure any of us would be glad to try to answer those through email. So I want to encourage, so first of all, a round of applause and thanks to all of our panelists. I think you did a superb job. Really appreciate it. Want to encourage everybody to stay online because in just a few minutes, the program will move along. We'll feature an address on the regulatory landscape for hemp by Cornell University Professor of Horticulture, Larry Smart. So with that, I'd like to thank the audience for their attendance and the panelists for their presentations. Thank you very much.